Hello and welcome to the interview here on France 24. My guest today is James Clapper. He was the U.S. intelligence chief during most of the Obama administration. Since then, he's been outspoken in denouncing Russia's meddling in the presidential election. Donald Trump has described him, quote unquote, as a lying machine, and he recently published his memoirs, Facts and Fear, Hard Truth from a Life in Intelligence. Thank you for being with us via satellite from Washington, Mr. Clapper.
Well, thanks for having me.
I wanted to begin with the so-called political earthquake in Washington, where you are. Justice Anthony Kennedy is retiring from the Supreme Court. Donald Trump gets to appoint a second justice. Some believe this is indeed a political earthquake, and some are fearing that there could be dire consequences for America's human rights.
Well, it is, as you alluded, a profound event with Justice Kennedy's retirement and the almost, the certainty that another conservative justice will be appointed. So this has potentially wide-ranging and profound potential impacts on the daily lives of many Americans. Notably, of course, one of the first landmark cases that undoubtedly, at least in the minds of many, will come up for review would be Roe versus Wade, which right now legitimizes abortion in this country under certain conditions. And if that changes, of course, that could have wide-ranging impacts on this country. Now, I will say, right now, I think there's a good bit of hyperbole in discussing this, since we don't even have a nominee yet. But certainly, people are projecting, in the case of Democrats or liberals, worse fears here. So we'll just have to see how this plays out. But potentially, given our system and the length of time that justices typically serve, this could have impacts for decades.
Right. Staying with the Supreme Court, it also gave President Trump a boost by essentially endorsing his travel ban from 6 countries. This has been criticized as a quote-unquote Muslim ban. But in terms of national security, do you think this could have consequences for the United States?
Well, I do. I think actually it could be counterproductive in terms of what the ostensible objective is, which is to enhance the safety and security of the country. It could have just the opposite effect, because I think this could could polarize even further and serve to help radicalize Muslims around the world who might, want to engender violent acts against the United States. So I'm not sure that this is going to have the ostensible intended objective achieved.
Right. I want to get, obviously, to the issue of Russia, which you discuss at length in your book. We now know that there will be, or there should be, a Donald Trump-Vladimir Putin summit scheduled for July 16th in Helsinki, just after a NATO summit. Do you think this is a good thing that both men are meeting, or are you concerned that this is too hasty given all that's happened, given all that's being said, including by the intelligence community?
Well, I think it's a good thing that the two leaders communicate. I think that that's a good thing. The issue is what's said or what's not said. I think based on the Singapore summit that President Trump had with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, that for President Trump, this may be more about form than actual substance, and so I'm concerned about what either wittingly or unwittingly could be conceded to Mr. Putin, who's pretty shrewd about these kinds of things.
Right.
So I think it's a big deal from a form standpoint, and but what seems to be uppermost in Mr. Trump's mind is having a positive relationship with autocrats. Seems to be a pattern here. So I do think the one good news aspect of this is at least he'll have benefit of a session with the NATO member leaders before he meets with Putin. And I think if it were the reverse, that would not be good at all, just from a form standpoint.
Right. I want to go back essentially to the issue that you've been involved in, actually attacked by the president for what you've said, the Russian meddling. I mean, back in 2016, you gave a speech, May 2016, warning about the Russian government targeting the campaign. You then came up with an official declaration in October, but essentially no one really listened. Do you regret not being outspoken, or Barack Obama not being more outspoken, maybe because the assumption was that Hillary Clinton would win anyway?
Well, first, the announcement, the release that I made jointly with then Secretary of Homeland Security Jay Johnson on the 7th of October, which was a pretty forthright and I think candid depiction of what we saw at the time going on with the Russians interfering and attempting to influence the outcome of the election. Unfortunately, that came out simultaneously with the revelation of the Access Hollywood audio tape of President Trump, and as well the revelation of the dumping of the John Podesta emails. So our release, intended to alert the public, and particularly the electorate, got lost because of that. And, you know, you can do the coulda, woulda, shouldas all day long, but I suppose personally I would have preferred a more robust response before the election. But that said, you have to remember what the contemporary environment was at the time. And first, there was concern about would we be amplifying or hyping what the Russians were doing, or dignifying it by making a big announcement about it. And I do think President Obama was legitimately concerned about the optic of his putting his hand on the scale in favor of one of the candidates and to the disfavor of the other. And in the very highly charged environment of that campaign, and in the face of President Trump's assertion that the election would be rigged, I suppose in anticipation that he would lose the election. So I think those were the mitigating factors that prevented a more robust, inhibited a more robust response earlier.
Right, and obviously everyone is wondering why, and this is what Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller is looking at. Obviously, you've seen a lot of intelligence. You believe, and you write in your book, that actually what the Russians did swung the election, and you seem to think that this was coming directly from Vladimir Putin, that there's no question about that.
First, I have to say, just to reiterate the point, that the intelligence community assessment that we rendered on the 6th of January of 2017 made no pronouncement whatsoever about the impact of the Russian meddling on the outcome of the election. The U.S. intelligence community has neither the charter, the authority, nor the resources to do that. However, on the 20th of January at 12:01 p.m., I became a private citizen. And knowing what I knew of what the Russians did before I left the government, and what I have since seen that has been revealed, most notably, I'd call attention to the February indictment that Special Counsel Mueller's investigation revealed, and the indictment of the 13 Russian persons and 3 corporate entities, which to me served as a validating bookend to our intelligence community assessment. So when you consider that the election turned on less than 80,000 votes in 3 key states, and when you look at the massive effort that the Russians directed across many fronts and using multifaceted enablers, notably social media, it's almost, to me, it just stretches logic and credulity to think that the Russians didn't have profound impact on the outcome of the election. In fact, could have turned it.
Right. Just the last question. Obviously, it's a big question of collusion. Donald Trump has accused many former intelligence officials, including you, of leaking damaging stuff on him, even spying on him. I mean, does he have a point? This is being investigated by the Department of Justice. What's your response to those accusations that you essentially tried to smear him through media leaks and other means?
No, that's absurd. I take exception to that. We didn't leak anything at all. So I don't. I obviously don't agree with the allegations of leaking. He accused the intelligence community of leaking the infamous dossier, which we did not do. Dossier is not an intelligence document. It was widely distributed already. I first learned about it in mid-December, and so the media and at least two members of Congress already had the dossier. And our only point in briefing him about it, I felt, as others did, that A, he needed to know that it was out there, and B, then Director Jim Comey of the FBI was concerned about the counterintelligence implications, in which involved the Russians' use of compromat or compromising material, whether it's real or contrived, and the potential leverage that the Russians might try to exert.
What's your assessment? Do you think they have something on President Trump? And that'll be my last question.
I don't know. And with specific respect, first to your question about collusion, I didn't see any smoking gun evidence of that before I left the government, although some would assert that candidate Trump's exhortation to the Russians to go find 30,000 missing emails was a pretty overt form of attempted collusion, not to mention the Trump Tower meeting in June. So I hope the important point here is that the Special Counsel Mueller will resolve this issue one way or the other. Because this is a cloud hanging over this country, and it's a cloud hanging over the presidency, and it needs resolution one way or the other.
Okay, James Clapper, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. And thank you for watching this edition. Stay tuned for more news.